All right, welcome back. This is chapter 5 of Behind the Bedroom Walls. A little bit longer of a chapter than chapter 4 was, and there will be 3 questions at the end. Here we go. Chapter 5. For a long time, Corinna tossed and turned as the candles burned lower and lower. She was afraid to be without the light, knowing the enemy was so close. She could hardly believe she'd been sleeping peacefully these last few nights with hated Jews so near. Now that she knew what was on the other side of her wall, she'd never be able to sleep easily again. When the candles finally burned out, Corinna's eyes were still open. She slipped out from under her warm blankets and tiptoed over to the window. Pushing open the curtain, she hoped there would be some moonlight to light up her room, but the sky was black. Even the snow on the ground looked black. Corinna shivered in the cold air and got back into bed, leaving the curtain open. When a pale glow filled the room, as the morning sun inched over the eastern edge of the city, Corinna finally fell asleep. When she awoke, the curtain once again covered the window, blocking out most of the sunlight. She heard footsteps come up the stairs and someone knock on her door. Her mother quietly pushed the door open and peeked in. Corinna, are you awake? Corinna closed her eyes and lay still. She heard her mother come in the room and place something on the foot of her bed. She smelled warm rye bread and potato and carrot soup. They had gathered plenty of vegetables from their garden during the summer. Corinna's stomach growled. She was just about to wake up and thank her mother for bringing up some food for her when she heard the soft swish of her wardrobe being pulled away from the wall. Corinna grimly realized the food was not for her. Guten Morgen, Frau Rehm said in a loud whisper, lifting the tray off her daughter's bed. Corinna heard Sophie grunt an indistinguishable greeting. At least she could be civil, thought Corinna angrily. She didn't like to think of her mother waiting on this rude woman. It was humiliating having her mother serve a hated, thankless Jew. Did you sleep well? It was cold, Sophie said with a mouthful of food. Frau Rehm sighed. I know, it was colder last night than it has been in a while. Tonight I'll give you my extra blanket. That should help. Corinna could barely contain herself. Let the Jews freeze. Her mother shouldn't be giving up her warmth to help the enemy. What was she thinking? The soup is very good, Rachel said softly. Thank you. It's Corinna's favorite, too. Is that the girl I met last night? Rachel asked. Corinna guessed her mother nodded because then Rachel loudly said, She's pretty, forgetting to keep her voice down. Shh, Sophie hissed. Corinna's still sleeping, Frau Rehm whispered. I don't think she slept very well last night. Doesn't she have to go to school? Rachel asked, her mouth obviously stuffed with something. Shh, repeated the little girl's mother. Not today, Corinna's mother said. Today she'll miss school just this once. I miss school every day, Rachel said sadly. I miss my friends. I'm sure you do, Frau Rehm said softly. But someday soon you'll have many new friends to play with. Corinna couldn't catch the little girl's reply, but whatever she said had made her mother laugh softly. Corinna realized she hadn't heard her mother laugh very much lately. Jealousy burned in her empty stomach. What will she do? It was Sophie speaking. Corinna had missed some of the question, but she knew immediately the Jew referred to her. I hope she'll do the right thing, said Corinna's mother, pausing. But she's very involved in her young model, and she honestly believes, well, they teach her many things at those meetings, Frau Rehm said, sounding apologetic. Why do you let her go? Sophie asked. We have no choice. If she didn't join the group, she would be made to join anyway, and she'd be watched with suspicion. And Bernd and I, too, would be watched more closely. It's best that everyone thinks we're loyal to the Führer. Then they don't suspect us of helping Jews. They've lied to her, Sophie stated flatly. Her mother sighed and started to reply. Corinna fumed. How dare her mother speak about her to this horrible Jew? And what did Sophie know about the wonderful things they did at Jung Model meetings? Her Jung Model leaders didn't lie to her. At the meetings, she learned patriotic songs. She baked, she hiked outside, made friends. She even got to march in parades. They listened to the Führer's speeches, which filled them with the pride for their fatherland. If anyone had lied to her, it was her very own parents. She was so angry she missed the rest of the conversation. All she heard was her mother reminding the Krugmans to be quiet. Then the wardrobe tapped lightly into place. She lay very still, too upset to talk to her mother. She wanted to talk to someone about all the awful things that were going on in her house, namely the Krugmans, but that person couldn't be her mother. Obviously, her mother wouldn't understand. Maybe she could talk to Rita. Corinna heard her mother step softly to her side. A cool hand brushed the hair off her forehead, and a kiss as light as a sigh was left on her cheek. Then her mother left. Corinna wiped the kiss away. Her mother was a traitor. How could she ever love her mother or father again the way she used to, knowing they weren't loyal to Germans? They weren't loyal Germans. Tears slipped through her tightly shut eyelids and slid across her nose and down onto the pillow. Why did things have to get so terrible? Why did her parents have to change? Actually, they hadn't changed, she realized miserably. They had always been traitors. She'd just never known it. When Corinna opened her eyes again, the curtain was open wide and the brilliant snowy sunlight from outside burst into her room. She stretched, her stomach growled. Throwing back her blanket, she sat up and swung her legs out of bed. Her clothes hung wrinkled and twisted on her body like the trunk of a gnarled tree. Glancing nervously at her wardrobe, she quickly changed into a wool skirt and an old blue sweater. Anger filled her. It wasn't right to feel so uncomfortable in her own room. Downstairs, Corinna found her mother sitting at the kitchen table peeling potatoes. She smiled brightly when Corinna walked into the room. So you finally decided to get up, she teased. Corinna shrugged. She longed to go to her mother and hug her and beg her to get rid of the Jews and become a loyal German, but she knew it would do no good. I guess I was very tired. You should have gotten me up for school, though. It won't hurt to miss one day, Corinna. You work hard and do well in school. Rita stopped by to see you after school. I told her you were sick. Knowing her best friend had stopped by to see her made her feel a little better. At least she could count on Rita. Corinna peered into a pot that sat on the small stove. I saved some soup for you, her mother said, nodding toward the pot Corinna inspected. Fresh bread, too. Normally, Corinna would have asked where the rest of the loaf had gone, but this time she knew it had gone to feed the enemy. She served herself some soup and bread and sat down at the table across from her mother. Did you sleep well? Fine, she said. The soup, her favorite kind, tasted bland today. Jews had enjoyed it before her and had taken all the flavor and enjoyment out of it. She pushed the bowl away. Do you want more? You must be hungry, having missed breakfast this morning. Corinna shook her head and stood up. I have schoolwork to do, she replied, leaving the kitchen. On her way up the stairs, her stomach rumbled fiercely. She tried to ignore the empty feeling in her stomach and in her heart. The Jews had tried to take the fatherland away from loyal Germans, and now they were trying to take her parents away from her. In her room, Corinna sat at her desk and stared at her open history book. Even her favorite subject didn't interest her today. She kept glancing at her wardrobe, wondering what those awful Jews were doing back there. She knew there couldn't be a window or even very much space. What did they do all day? She wondered. She turned back to her history book. Someday this book would be entirely rewritten thanks to Adolf Hitler. Hopefully, they would take out mention of the Treaty of Versailles as if it had never happened, which in fact it never should have. The Treaty of Versailles was a disgrace to Germany. Imagine Germany without an army or a navy or an air force. And Jews, she knew, had played a big part in this humiliation, though she wasn't quite sure exactly which part. But thanks to the Fuhrer, Germany would be the power it had been before the last war, which they had somehow lost. She knew Germany would now win back its pride and power as long as the enemy, the Jews, were kept out of the way. Traitors, like her parents, too. Corinna finished her schoolwork as the last feeble rays of the late winter sun filtered into her room, leaving it a muddy shade of rose. She shivered in the cool air. She stood up and stretched. It was hard to sit in one position for so long. As she shrugged her shoulders to relieve the tension, she heard the sound she had once believed to be mice trapped in her walls. Now that she knew what the sound really was, though, she didn't know how she ever could have thought it was mice. The sound was obviously rhythmic, not the erratic scrambling of mice, but the even pace of someone walking back and forth. Step, 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 turn, step, 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 turn. It must be a very small room, she thought. She started to walk in time to the sound of the steps. Step, 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 turn. A very small room. Corinna, Frau Rimm called from downstairs. Corinna opened her door and looked down to her mother standing at the foot of the stairs. Yes. Will you come down and help me? Corinna walked downstairs, following her mother into the kitchen. What are you cooking? She asked, spying her kitten curled up next to her milk bowl. Her mother pointed to the 2 pots on the stove. Potatoes here for the Krugmans and potatoes with cheese sauce in this pot for our supper. Why do you have to cook separately for them? Corinna asked, not able to bring herself to say their name. The Krugmans keep kosher. Corinna knew that the word kosher had something to do with the Krugmans' religion, but she didn't know what, and she didn't care. Kosher means they have to keep dairy products and meat separate. There's milk and cheese with our potatoes, so I have to cook them in a different pot. The Krugmans will have plain potatoes and a little bit of beef. Corinna stared at her mother. That's stupid. Frau Ream set down her wooden spoon with an abrupt snap. People have a right to their beliefs, Corinna, she said sharply. But you shouldn't be working so hard for them, Mother. Why are you cooking for them? Such a big, hot supper anyway. What's wrong with the bread and cheese or plain leftovers we usually have? It's so chilly outside. I thought some hot food would help warm them up before the long, cold night. But they're only Jews, Corinna protested. They're people, her mother said, suddenly sounding weary. They're the enemy, Corinna countered stubbornly. And they shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be waiting on them the way you are. Frau Ream waved the wooden spoon. Corinna, they have nothing. Should I take away their religion too? It's no hardship for me to try to cook for them in a kosher manner, so why shouldn't I? And why shouldn't I make them a hot meal? Corinna sat on a chair and pinched her lips together. It was no use talking to her mother. Frau Ream sighed. Take this tray. She handed her daughter a tray with 2 bowls full of potatoes. She carried a tray with beef and carrots and glasses for water or milk. She walked to the kitchen door and looked back. Are you coming? Her mother asked. Corinna calmly stood and carried the tray, following her mother up the stairs. On the outside, she knew she appeared obedient and reserved, but inside anger roiled in her stomach like a pot of boiling soup. What was she doing? Now she was serving the enemy, waiting on them as if she were a servant or a slave. Staring at her mother's back, she had a strong urge to drop the tray she carried. It would make a mess she would gladly clean up. Anything was better than catering to these Jews. She hated the enemy of the fatherland. But instead, she quietly followed her mother into her bedroom, the tray still balanced carefully in her hands. Her mother pulled the wardrobe away from the wall, and Corinna smelled the cloud of confined air rushed out at her. The musty smell of burning wax, stale breath, and a full chamber pot, and unwashed bodies. It was the despicable stink of Jews, Corinna thought, trying to hold her breath. Frau Ream took the tray from Corinna and passed it to the Krugmans. Thank you, Sophie said, sniffing the food appreciatively. It looks and smells wonderful. You're getting better at keeping things kosher, she added. Corinna's mother smiled. I'm learning. Sophie returned the smile. Danke. It was the first smile Corinna had seen from this woman, but it quickly disappeared as she glanced up from the opening to Corinna, standing behind her mother. She wished she had on her June model uniform. In the failing light, Corinna noticed the heavy circles under Frau Krugman's dark eyes, and her thin face looked wan, almost the color of her faded yellow bedroom walls. Later, I'll bring up some hot water for you to bathe with, Frau Ream offered. Give me your chamber pot and I'll empty it now. Corinna nearly gagged as Frau Krugman passed the lidded pot out to her mother. She couldn't bear the thought of her mother cleaning it for these abhorrent Jews. It was more than humiliating, it was hateful. But all she could do was watch as her mother lifted the heavy pot and went into the bathroom with it. Corinna watched Frau Krugman eat. Should she push the wardrobe back in place, or was her mother coming right back? What if someone unexpectedly stopped by the house? Would he hear the schrank being pushed back into place and wonder about it? She looked toward the window. Shouldn't the curtain be closed in case the Schlossers happened to look out their back window and into hers? Quickly, she moved to the window and pulled the heavy curtain closed so her neighbors wouldn't find out they lived near traders. She clenched her teeth. Hello? Corinna looked back at the opening in the wall. The little girl with the curly hair poked her head out. Now Corinna could see that the hidden room glowed with candlelight. Hello, Corinna said gruffly. Do you remember me? The little girl asked shyly. Corinna nodded. My name's Rachel. I think your hair is very pretty. Corinna didn't say anything. She didn't want this little Jewess saying nice things to her. She turned away from the wardrobe and faced her desk. Are you doing homework? The little girl asked. Corinna shook her head without turning around. She lit the candle her father had left on her desk. Mama, look, her hair shines like that statue we used to have in our front hall. Yes, darling, just like bronze, Frau Krugman agreed softly. Now scoot back and leave her alone. Corinna heard her mother walk in with the washed-out chamber pot. Here you go, Sophie. I'll leave the wardrobe open to give you some fresh air, and in a little while I'll bring up that hot water. Do you have any more paper, Frau Ream? Rachel asked quickly. Corinna's mother paused slightly. Perhaps my daughter has some she could give you, Rachel. Corinna frowned. She didn't want to give anything away to a Jew, not even paper. Fraulein? Rachel asked. Do you have a little paper for me? Corinna hastily pinched a few sheets from her supply and turning around thrust them at the girl. Here. Oh, thank you, Rachel gushed, and her pale face lighting up with her smile. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What do you want them for? Corinna asked before she could stop herself. I like to draw, like this. She disappeared for a second, then reappeared with a sheaf of paper clutched in her hand. See? She held the small bundle of paper toward Corinna. The drawings were all done with a gray pencil, so they looked rather dull and lifeless. Corinna knew she could simply turn her back and walk away. She didn't have to look at this Jew's drawings, but her hand moved forward anyway. She took the bundle and pulled off the string that held it together. The first one is my house. The house had flowers in front of it and someone in each window waving. Can I show her? Rachel asked Corinna's mother. Frau Ream glanced at the curtained window. You may come out, but Corinna has to crouch down so the people outside don't see a lot of shadows moving about. Corinna scowled at her mother. She had more important things to do than look at these ugly drawings. She tried to catch her mother's eyes, but her mother didn't seem to notice. Rachel crawled on all fours over to Corinna and squatted there until Corinna lowered herself to the floor. Corinna sat cross-legged, and Rachel leaned over one of the older girl's knees, pointing to the people in the window. That's my papa. He's with Ruth, staying somewhere else, and that's Ruth, my older sister. There's Mama, and that's me, she said, pointing to the face surrounded by curly hair. My hair is like my papa's. This is Ruth playing the piano, Rachel continued, pulling another drawing from the pile. She is very, very, very good. She wants to play the piano when she grows up and make people pay to come to hear her play, but she said I don't have to pay. Rachel extracted another drawing. And this is the apple tree in our yard. The flowers are pretty, but the apples are sour. She made a sour face. Corinna bit the inside of her lip, stopping her smile just in time. Rachel explained every drawing in her pile, and Corinna couldn't help noticing the wistful expression that sometimes overcame the girl's otherwise cheerful exuberance. She had more pictures of her house and family and of her friends and school and synagogue, some of which Corinna realized the little girl would probably never see again. But that didn't bother Corinna. After all, these were Jews, one of the enemies to the fatherland, and they deserved to suffer. My husband will be home soon, said Corinna's mother. She had been sitting on her daughter's bed watching. You better get back inside in case he brings someone home with him. Sometimes he's obliged to invite someone over for supper at the last minute, she explained. Rachel scrambled back into the hideaway with her drawings and her new paper. I'll bring your water up now before we eat, Frau Ream said. Don't rush, Sophie said. Take care of your family first. We're not going anywhere, she added wryly. Corinna's mother smiled at the attempted joke and closed the wardrobe against the wall. She shook her head. It's amazing how that woman still can hold her head up and find humor in her situation after all she's been through. She stacked the 2 trays of empty dishes. Do you need help carrying those downstairs? Corinna asked, ignoring the comment about the Jewess. No, thank you, Corinna. You've helped enough today, Frau Ream said thoughtfully. You've helped more than you know. Corinna scowled. She didn't want any thanks for being a traitor to her fatherland. She felt guilty enough as it was without her mother rubbing it in. She sat down at her desk and pretended to study until she heard her mother leave the room. Then, step, 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 turn. Rachel was walking behind the wall again. Corinna slammed her book shut, creating a loud cracking sound like a gunshot she'd once heard. The walking stopped. Corinna quickly left her room and sat alone in the quiet of the front room until her father came home for supper. Wonder what happened to your questions. So, oh, my internet went off. All right, so here's one question. What thoughts and feelings is Corinna having about her parents? And I will post the other 2 questions on Power School Learning. Okay,